Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Perspective. Do like, share, subscribe to the channel. You know we need your support. Even thank us. It's all possible. Just click on the buttons. It doesn't take long, but it helps us to bring the kind of guests that I really want to bring, the kind of guests who are actually speaking truth to power, who are voices of justice, who are on the front line and targeted. They also need your support. And today I have the honor of welcoming, first of all, Sam Weinstein. Sam, welcome.
Thank you.
Sam is the coordinator at IJAN, and that stands for the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network. Okay,
here in the UK, we are genuinely international, so that we are in Argentina, in the United States, in Canada, in Spain, and in Germany.
And I've seen you demonstrating outside the Israeli embassy very regularly, turning up to pro-Palestine demonstrations, being on the front line. And you yourself have been targeted, I believe, by the Metropolitan Police and have been one of its many victims in this campaign.
Indeed, I have a court case. My court case is kind of very similar to Ben Jamal and Chris Ninam's case. Rising from the same incident, I had the misfortune to suggest to people that they should go to the BBC to protest.
Well, this is an ongoing reality in Britain, which we've touched on before. But I'm going to, of course, open up what's going on a global level first. And with me online is Ryan Dawson, who's going to help us navigate that. I think we might. Yes, we've got Ryan. He's not frozen now. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, a lot happened today globally.
Yeah, so let's kick off with the latest, because you know the war in West Asia doesn't just affect people in West Asia. Inevitably, the whole world is involved in this. Give us a little update on what's happened and what the implications are.
You're correct. It's about a third of the world's energy that is on that maritime Silk Road out of the Strait of Hormuz or out of the Red Sea. And it affects everybody economically. It should affect everybody morally. You have Israel coming off an ongoing genocide of Palestine, and they're trying to do the same in Lebanon. And this was a red line that Iran had made, that Israel could not bomb the suburbs of Beirut, stop hitting these residential areas and highly, packed urban areas. It was part of the deal they were negotiating with the Americans. How sincere the U.S. is another question, but they've been trying to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and deal with uranium. That's what the U.S. says. It's ironic because the strait was already open before they attacked Iran, and the uranium in question was also on the table, and it had not even been enriched to 60% until Trump had torn up the JCPOA in the first place, which Iran had complied to all of the stipulations of that. They did allow inspectors from the IAEA. They did enrich only to 3.5%. They were following the rules. But the Obama and Biden administrations did not abide by lifting asset freezers or sanctions, although they promised to. And then Trump came in and didn't even have a pretense of that. He just tore up the deal. So Iran enriched up to 60% just to bargain it away. By the way, you need 90% to build a weapon. And they're part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and do have the right to pursue this anyway. So this is how it starts. Then Israel preemptively attacks them in the middle of negotiations for the second time, which kicked off this war from February 28th. That lasted another 41 days. Then there's a sort of a ceasefire. The ceasefire, although in the last 11 days, there have been 7 incursions where the U.S. has done self-defense bombings, whatever that means, where they've blown up radar, they murdered people in the Strait of Hormuz, they murdered sailors. And Iran has had very measured, mirrored responses where they would attack at about the same level, and they would hit their partners in Kuwait and Bahrain, whoever was allowing the U.S. to use their airspace and use their territory to launch attacks into Iran, received in kind the same kind of inflicted damage at about the same level. So it was already teetering from breaking out into a hot war again. And then the Israelis went and did the exact thing they said you cannot do, the red line that they had made, which was bombing Beirut. And so Iran sent 20 missiles into Israel, and they did that. And then Israel bombed 4 different cities, and including the capital, but especially in Isfahan. And then Iran responded to that by targeting Nablus, Haifa, west of Jerusalem. They hit Negev, all over the place. And the Houthis got involved. Ansar Allah fired a missile at southern Israel. Hezbollah fired rockets because they don't have missiles, but they fired rockets in the northern Israel. And so they were taking it, but they only hit military bases. They hit the David Ratam Air Base in the north. They took out mostly offensive capabilities, not residential zones. They don't just bomb hospitals and schools like America and Israel does. They don't just carpet bomb settlements or something. They hit military installations. But what was very telling is the one thing they didn't hit was Ben Gurion Airport. They allowed them to flee because they're letting the reservists leave. A lot of them are fleeing, going to Cyprus or Thailand or whatever. They don't want to be there. But Israel brought this on themselves by continually bombing civilians in Beirut especially. They're doing it in southern Lebanon as well. That's now been included. If Israel bombs Lebanon, they can fight with Hezbollah. But if they're going to just start bombing people in their homes, Iran's going to hit them. Trump embarrassed himself because after the first exchange, he said, knock it off, no more, stop shooting at each other, and he went to sleep. And all of this broke out after that. He woke up screaming for them both to stop and that the U.S. was close to a deal. But I don't know how anyone could believe this. How can you be close to a ceasefire deal when you have carrier strike forces sitting in the Gulf of Oman? You didn't lift assets freezers. You didn't lift a single sanction. You could incrementally do steps to show your earnestness to get a deal, and he hasn't done it. And they can't do it by force. They cannot get into the Strait of Hormuz, and they're going to end up with the Bab el-Mandab Strait closed as well, which it is now to Israeli ships. But if they close that to Saudi ships, this is going to be a global economic disaster. So you can't just stick your head in the sand in this. This is a lot bigger than Palestine now. But it should have stopped then. They never should have gotten to that point. If the world had not turned a blind eye to Palestine, it would not have expanded into all these other areas.
Well, that's a pretty good comprehensive overview. Thanks there, Ryan. Sam, bringing you into this conversation, I've not talked to you about this conflict before. I know you're a pro-Palestinian supporter, and you know Israel very well, and your own Jewish background, your own kind of activism, and also being partly from the US. I'm not sure whether you're a US citizen still, but you certainly have a connection.
I'm a dual citizen, both of the UK and of the US.
That's quite unique, yes. But what's your take on this? Where is this going? And how's Trump handled this? Does he have autonomy in the way he deals with Israel? Who wears the trousers in this relationship? It's
well, I think there is a right-wing element that keeps on suggesting that somehow Netanyahu fooled Trump into getting into this. And unfortunately, I think that has penetrated certain parts of the pro-Palestinian movement as well. I think everybody has to deal with the reality that Israel, the state of Israel, has been a project of the United States and Western Europe for its whole history. And we always have to remember that there are more Christian Zionists in the United States than there are Jews in the world. And so that's very fundamental to all this. Where it's going, I don't think any of us quite know. I think most of us probably think that Trump is a complete lunatic. Netanyahu is a fascist of the first order, and there's no question that he would like to do all kinds of things What Trump will allow him to do is a different matter. What the American state will allow him to do is a different matter. I think it was very interesting to see that when Iran first told Trump that if the Israelis go ahead and bomb Lebanon, but bomb Beirut, then we'll stop any negotiations. And immediately Trump called Netanyahu, which one, told you how much power in the situation Iran has, and secondly, told you who was wearing the pants, and that Trump immediately yanked Netanyahu's chain.
So the exchanges continued, even though Donald Trump has told him to knock it off, if you like. It's confusing at times as to where, the US really wants to go with this. They've really obviously worked out that after two exchanges, the 12-day war, the 40-day war, the result has been the same, that Iran still stands. It's probably even more popular globally as a result. It's solidified its own population under the leadership of yet another Sayyid Khamenei. They replaced one with another. They've managed to get the whole of the world's economy completely rattled with the closure of Hormuz, which didn't exist beforehand. And they've managed to have most of their bases destroyed in the region, whilst creating a very tense relationship with their puppets in the region, because they are on the front line and Iran has not spared them. That took the US by surprise, I think. So if I was to continue listing all the things that have occurred as a result of this aggression by Israel initially and by the Americans subsequently, I'd say that they're in a worse position potentially than they were prior to starting all of this business. And they've not achieved any nuclear gains on this. They don't have the uranium, and they've not stopped, I guess, they've not also exercised regime change. So what was the point of all this?
That's a very good question, and I've heard many different explanations. The first thing I'd want to say is I think that's also true in relation to the Palestinians. I think Israel is in a much worse situation now than it was before. Okay. I think every bomb they drop now is another nail in the coffin of Zionism, frankly, and of the Israeli state, which I think is really important to keep in mind. I've heard one explanation that what the U.S. was really after was cutting off oil from China. And that's what was really involved with the excursion into Iran, this absurd excursion, which has left a lot of people dead. I mean, that's the first thing. There are a lot of people dead, including 175 young girls, mirroring what Israel has done in Gaza, in that it targeted women and children. And what is still happening on the West Bank, and the number of people that are being killed in Lebanon on a regular basis now. The genocide in Gaza has now begun to spread. They clearly think that they can do anything, and so the genocide has really spread to Lebanon. Now, what will get them out of this, or what their intent was, sometimes we won't know for a long time. But the explanation that made most sense to me, quite frankly, was the idea that they were trying to cut China off from oil.
Roots and resources, yes, that still is a very, very strong factor. But the new equation that you did mention a few times in your opening salvo, Ryan, was that Lebanon was protected by Iran. Now, Iran hasn't done that formally before. It's not actually hit Israel on the basis of what Israel is doing to another nation or another people. Even in the case of Palestine and Gaza, Iran didn't hit Israel because they were committing the genocide necessarily, although that might have been a factor in their minds or their ideological framework. It wasn't actually the strategic military reason for doing it. That was that Israel had hit Iran. So it was within its rights to hit back Israel, once its own sovereignty had been violated. So Iran's been very careful about how they play this military strategic sort of asymmetric warfare business. But now they've changed the equation, because whilst they have allies in Iraq with the Hashd al-Shahabi, they have allies in Yemen with the Ansarullah. Of course, in Gaza, their allies are there as well, with the likes of Hamas and the PFLP. In fact, all of the resistance groups there. But they have a special relationship with the Lebanese resistance. Why have they chosen now to actually carry out their support of allies directly?
Because they have the means. Like they tried protecting Syria as well. If you remember, there were Shia militias fighting against ISIS inside Syria. They did send generals and blood, and they went into Syria to protect them too. And it worked at first. But with the combined efforts of the Gulf states and Turkey, the United States and Israel was just too much. Like Syria was broken economically, and now they're run by terrorists. When al-Jilani can go to the White House and shake hands. But as far as cutting oil off to China, that Chinese oil has not been cut off. Now they're getting it, and they're getting it almost exclusively. And Japan and Korea also buy oil from Iran. They went into Iran because that was part of the script. Netanyahu wanted to topple Iran because Iran sponsors these resistance groups that go against Israel's regional ambitions of annexation and ethnic cleansing. And they've been talking about it for 40 years. It has nothing to do with uranium, had nothing to do with the Chinese. It had to do with the fact that Iran stands against Israel. And, they went through this with Iraq. They went through this with Syria. They wrote it out. Netanyahu wrote a book about it, about all the countries he wanted to topple. And from Kennedy onward, every American president has kowtowed to Israel, but Eisenhower didn't. He sided with Nasser in the Suez crisis. They went against the Israelis. Kennedy was going against the Israelis, but someone shot him. But from LBJ onward, it's been awful. And they've been on, like hand in glove with the Israeli imperial ambitions. They send them money, they send them weapons.
There have been three
industry anyway.
There have been three negotiations which are prominent in my mind, in which the US was trying to settle this situation with Iran. On all three occasions, it seems either the US or Israel, while they were negotiating, have gone in and bombed Iran. Can Iran have any trust in so-called diplomacy and negotiations now? Is it really like flogging a dead horse? And in a way, was Trump privy to this attack? I mean, I can't believe that CENTCOM and the CIA wouldn't know that the Israelis were planning this.
No, they can try to play stupid if they want, but the plan was to hit them during negotiations, as they'd done before. They're not sincere. Like, even when Iran put the uranium on the table, they said, okay, fine. This is February 26th. Then they said, and your ballistic missiles too. They just keep increasing demands until it reaches some impossible level that they have to say no to, because they're never interested in making a deal. They were so arrogant. They thought if they assassinated the Ayatollah that the whole regime would crumble and, we'd be thanked in the streets with cakes or something. And they really didn't have a plan B. And you're seeing them. The U.S. used to have real diplomats and real statesmen. They don't now. There's no James Baker. There's no Schwarzkopf. It's like Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff. They're the two real estate agents from New York. They're not. They went to Ukraine and they couldn't even name what the oblasts were, right? So they're not serious. And Marco Rubio, the other day in Congress, they said, Greenland's part of Denmark. He said, for now. I mean, this is kind of really childish, really asinine way of looking at the world. They're not serious about negotiations. They're not going to make a deal with Iran. They never were. They were looking for an excuse to attack them. And it was the same with Iraq. They knew there were no weapons of mass destruction. They just lied. And it was the same thing with Assad. And with the gas attacks, they all lied about. It's not mistakes. It's not bad intelligence. It's on purpose. They want to topple these regimes. And it's like, well, is the U.S. the boss? Is Israel the boss? It's not. They're ideologically in line. They do it together.
So, Sam, you've heard Ryan. Take
Obviously, we disagree.
take up anything that you'd like, which has been put across by him, but also Israel itself. You know, it's a nation which is now increasingly evidenced as being quite extreme in its own perception of itself in the world, its Greater Israel project, the emergence of very blatantly, openly apartheid-orientated fascists like Ben Gvir and Smotrich and Netanyahu himself, to be honest, the whole of Likud. There has clearly become an even greater hardening of Israel in the society itself, because between 70 and 90% agree with the Gazan wipeout, the ethnic cleansing. That's the last I heard. Most of them agree with the war on Iran as well. So it's not just a sort of an elitist Israeli leadership thing, is it? It's this idea of surviving based on active offensive war with its neighbors and beyond seems to be ingrained in their doctrine. Is that just something that we're going to have to live with, and that means that therefore war and hard power is the only way that you're going to get Israel to become any kind of normal part of the global community, if you like?
Well, first, let me say what IJAN stands for, because I think it's relevant to this discussion. We stand for the absolute right of the Palestinians to return to their home in historic Palestine. We stand for their right to oppose genocide, resist genocide, ethnic cleansing, and mass murder by any means necessary, and we stand for dismantling the state of Israel. So the idea that Israel would ever become a normal part of the international community to us is anathema. It just has to be destroyed. The state has to be destroyed. And once the state, and once the whole Zionist infrastructure has been destroyed, then people of the Middle East can begin to figure out, and that includes Jews, can begin to figure out what they want.
That's incredible. I mean, just to be heard saying that you want to dismantle Israel can be one of the most heinous crimes. Of course, we've discussed the IHRA and anti-Semitism. You could be accused of all sorts of things just for saying that as a Jew, which I find incredible, but that's the reality.
Yeah, but the other thing about it is I come from a different Jewish tradition than Netanyahu and company. The Jewish tradition I come from is the Jewish tradition of Marak Edelman, who was the last survivor of the Warsaw Ghetto and who said to be a Jew was to always be on the side of the oppressed, never the oppressor. And that's what it has always meant to be Jewish. Ryan suggested that it was just the religion, but it is not just the religion, frankly. There are a lot of us who are not religious, but are very proud of being Jewish, because that's the tradition we come from, fighting imperialism, fighting ethnic cleansing, because often we were the subject of that ethnic cleansing, and mass murder, obviously, the Nazi mass murder. And, one of the things, particularly since we're sitting here in England, I want to point out that we are now beginning to talk about the Warsaw Ghetto Intifada. Not just an uprising, but it was an intifada.
Wow.
Since that wording is a problem for the British state, we want to make it clear that the Warsaw Ghetto was a Jewish intifada.
Wow, that's some powerful words there. Any reaction to that?
Yeah, Judaism is a religion. Jewishness is an identity, and that can just be based on a shared history or an ethnicity or whatever. But yeah, it was a Jewish intifada. And people should side with the oppressed, no matter who it is.
We're having trouble with the sound. You might have to just speak a little more loudly, or if we could get studio to push the sound up.
Did I get how 1, 2, 3? Epstein didn't kill himself? Is it coming through? No?
Sure.
We'll shoot.
That's a little better.
There, is it going? Yeah. The way I sound, I do sound
That's better.
tests. Instead of counting to 10, I say Epstein didn't kill himself. It goes through.
Well, that's your cheekiness. You're allowed that on this show. But yeah, I can hear you more clearly now, so you can respond to Sam, no problem.
I forgot what was the question again now.
I was just saying the whole. You're going into the notion of Jewishness and Judaism and the differences.
Well, Judaism is a religion. Jewishness is an identity. And so you don't have to be practicing the religion like your parents could be religious. It's just a shared history. Just like being Irish. Irish is a nationality, but you have the Irish diaspora in the United States, maybe never been to Ireland, but they feel Irish, right? Because their parents are from there or whatever. You know, it's not a race. The race is white. You know, they're not that they're the same as British, French, whatever. So people, they define these things differently. Some will say they're a secular Jew, whatever. I'm not talking about any of that. I was talking about the way Israel, Zionists, try to monopolize and say, well, this is a Jewish state, meaning a place to practice that faith and culture. But they don't monopolize that, obviously. And the current Zionist regime, it shouldn't exist in its current iteration. I mean, it's just an apartheid with land annexation and ethnic cleansing. And to try to say that that's a product of Judaism or Jewishness, either one, is nuts. It's a product of that state and their political decisions. Just like North Korea right above me, that's not because of their Koreanness, it's because of a dictatorship that they have up there.
So it seems like both of you are agreeing on this much, that the Palestinian issue, which would mean the Israel issue, is still the central problem. That's still the central issue, even though we're talking about Iran versus Israel, or Iran versus the US, or Israel versus Lebanon. It seems that, I mean, both of you may well agree on this, that actually the real fundamental issue is still Palestinian liberty, even though all these other wider implications are going. Is that still the core problem?
Yeah, I mean, I don't make it a pissing contest of who suffered the most, but it's obviously like putting a state on top of a state was a mistake from the beginning. Had the Nakba, none of these things should have ever happened. But it's just unconscionable that it took until Gaza has basically been destroyed, the West Bank's being colonized, they're losing more aquifers, more land, more houses, and they're bombing the Lebanese. And then finally, Iran can try to come to the rescue. But, Iran wasn't in a position, I think they were afraid of the U.S. and military and Israeli military might, but they've used their geography perfectly, and their best asset's Donald Trump, because you have the most powerful Navy, most powerful Air Force, most powerful economy in the world, but it's led by a moron. So they actually have a shot at winning this. But, Iran cares about Palestine as well, but I just don't think they had the ability to project that power, unfortunately. And now they say 71,000, I think is a lot more than that, have been murdered in Gaza, and they're being murdered in the West Bank as well. And so it just has to end. It's not a Netanyahu problem. Who would replace him? Name me the moderate, sane Israeli politician, right? We'll be here all day.
Yeah,
they're all like that. Yeah.
Well, so Sam, focusing back on the Palestine issue, and yes, Iran has always, since the 79 revolution, has been, unequivocally supportive of Palestine. The Al-Quds Day was declared by Ayatollah Khomeini, I remember, virtually in the first year. And since then, they've been constantly raising this issue of Palestine. And some would argue that even the March of Return may well be something which people like Mr. Soleimani and others within the Iranian establishment may have worked with the Palestinian resistance to regenerate support. Once we saw Abraham Accords and we saw the destruction of the Oslo Accords, etc. So in a way, Iran has been integrally supportive of Palestine. Palestinians and the resistance movement there wasn't necessarily always supportive of Iran. Even now, there are people like Khalid Mishal and others who lean towards Muslim Brotherhood and Qatar, who wouldn't necessarily be great fans of Iran. Yahya Sinwar and people like Ismail Haniyeh were. So there's this interesting dynamic of how things have evolved, even within the Palestinian movement, with the PLO being prominent, but now it's Hamas. and the history around that and Israel's supposed involvement with that is all very, very complex. But
I think you got to be careful not to confuse a couple of things.
sure.
You're saying in support of Iran. Well, of course, there are an enormous number of people who want the U.S. to lose this war, right? And Israel, both of them, to lose this war.
Right.
That does not necessarily mean that they support the Iranian government, which is two different things. And I think you have to be a little careful not to just conflate those things all the way through.
Sure. No, I get that. I appreciate that not everybody who is supporting Iran is doing so because they believe in the government, but they believe in the fact that they are, I guess, standing up for the resistance against imperialism or
Exactly.
imperialism.
And I would bet that a lot of the people that you are saying are not supportive of Iran are supporting them in this circumstance.
Sure. No, I have no doubt that that's the case. In terms of Israel itself, you talked about dismantling it. Now, Iran would probably agree with you that it needs dismantling. That's probably where the government itself is pushed. And now probably the people themselves are clamoring for that kind of thing. Dismantling Israel is no mean task. It's supported by the US. It's funded by the US in a huge way. It's still very, very powerful. What's your thought about that dismantlement process? Can it happen with soft power, or does it have to be hard power and military force that's going to do it?
Listen, there's no way of telling exactly how it's going to collapse, but my guess is that it will internally collapse. Already in the United States, a large section of the public has been completely turned off by the genocide and the ethnic cleansing, and is no longer supportive. And even that's true, particularly of young Jews in the United States, are no longer supporting Israel in that kind of a way.
Sure.
So the underpinnings are beginning to give. You know, we have to harken back to South Africa, right? Bit by bit, it began to be under pressure from outside, and then internally, the apartheid regime collapsed. And that's why we, of course, like I'm sure you are, and Ryan, we're great supporters of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. That's what we did to South Africa. That's part of what brought it down. And so that's where we're aiming at. We have been running a picket now outside the Israeli embassy, sometimes outside until we got banned by the police, outside the Israeli ambassador's house. Then we got banned from a large section of northwest London. But we have been running a picket for 136 weeks. And we're part of this huge international movement that's supporting the Palestinians and calling for boycott, divestment, and sanctions in all kinds of ways. Some people taking direct action. As we know, Pal Action was taking direct action in the Elbit factories. And in other parts of the world, Elbit is also under pressure. So increasingly, we see that pressure mounting on Israel in support of the Palestinians. And I just believe that eventually it will just collapse of its own weight.
What do you think, Ryan? Is it possible to dismantle Israel simply with soft power, or does it require a combination of soft, hard, and smart power? And is that on the horizon now, given the way Iran is dealing with Israel?
I helped get going the divestment movement of the Presbyterian Church back in 2005, as well as the College of William and Mary. We were one of the first colleges in the U.S. It wasn't called BDS back then. It didn't have that name until Michigan and some others got on board, but I was part of that from the very beginning. Yeah, it's really U.S.-Israel has a parasitic relationship. Like it's when they say like, well, young Jews are against it, it's never really been American Jews. It's been Christian Zionists that are the overwhelming super majority of supporters of Israel. And they're starting to wane because a lot of these dispensationalist Christian types, it's very hard for them to look at a phone and see a toddler crushed in rubble or a hospital bombed and try to justify that. And so, but more so what happened was all these people who used to sit on the fence are no longer sitting on the fence. They're saying, this is enough. This is disgusting. Why are we paying for this? We got our own problems in the United States. Why are we blowing up kids in Gaza? You know, it was like a slave revolt. You can't blame that on the slaves. You got to blame it on slavery. And so if you're going to have an apartheid and wrap somebody up in a wall and control their water and don't let them have a port and airport and all the abuse that Gaza went through, and then they rebel against you and you act shocked. Why would they do this? For no reason. And people are seeing through it. And the two things, I said this last time, but with the combination of early Elon's Twitter and TikTok, information got out to the youth about what was really going on, things that you could never say or see in the past that, you know, some of us knew. But if you told me 15 years ago, you know, that this would happen, it just seemed impossible when we first started these divestment movements. But now it's college campuses across the United States are protesting genocide. And that it was never at that level. And it happened so quickly. And Israel kind of did this to themselves. But you think, what was so different? I mean, they did this in all these different operations, from the bombings in 06 and then Cast Lead and Pillar of Defense and Protective Edge and March for Peace and the 2021 crisis. Like, they've always killed journalists. They've always blown up the press and the hospitals. And they even blew up the zoo one time. They attacked it. What was different is it was on camera finally. What was different was Telegram and cell phones and ways to get this information to people who weren't evil. They just never knew what was going on. And TV wasn't going to talk about it. And so the internet is what has allowed normal Americans, Europeans, whatever, to see what's been happening all along. And they're disgusted with it. And the moment Israel loses American support, it's over. Because they don't have the means to sustain it.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the billions. People say 3.5 billion, but I think it's far more once you start adding all the add-ons and
federal aid
and the corporate
states give them aid.
Yeah.
You know?
So Sheldon Addison and his wife Miriam, of course, Sheldon's died now, but Miriam's still very much at the heart of financing a lot of what's going on.
Dawson does money laundering out of Macau from a series of state aid washed through casinos and then donated by individuals. And then they give it to AIPAC, UDP, and that's how they control politicians.
They're trying to integrate the Israeli military into the United States military. Formally, they're now trying to, so that you would see that the Israeli military is just a section of the U.S. military.
So it'll become open, but what was an unwritten rule would become like more...
That's what they're trying to do, but there's going to be a lot of opposition.
There is something... Laith Marouf, a Palestinian journalist and activist, he has maybe fairly or unfairly, I'm not sure, I'm not going to judge it, but he said that, look, the thing is, the resistance or the liberation of Palestinians ultimately has to have a military element. That's what's going to change the reality on the ground. And he says, you know, I haven't seen, and it's a maybe not, it's a kind of very contentious allegation to make or statement to make, but I'll raise it anyway with you. He'll say that we've not seen so far any Jewish contribution towards the resistance inside Israel, i.e. there's no insurrection going on. For that matter, you could argue that the Palestinians that live inside Israel also are not taking up arms or going after the Israeli establishment. I guess because they'll get the same treatment that the Palestinian prisoners who are picked up from the West Bank will get. And I guess that's a fear factor which exists. But do you think there's ever going to be any chance that you get a Jewish resistance inside Israel itself?
Well, it depends on what you mean by resistance. I don't know if you'll ever get a military resistance inside Israel itself. Anything is possible. There are plenty of Jewish people who are obviously supporting the Palestinians, and I believe some of them are probably working with Palestinian resistance in different places. There is resistance on a number of levels. There's a tremendous refusal movement in Israel, starting, by the way, with the religious who make a claim that they don't have to fight at all. And that's something like 40% of the population, right? But on top of that, there are a whole series of people who have gone to jail. And on top of that, you know, I'm a survivor. I'm a draft dodger from the Vietnam War, right? And so I know how a lot of people dodged the draft during that war, and they did it through claiming psychological problems and all kinds of things. And the same thing is happening in Israel. There is a resistance from that point of view. Whether it'll ever turn into a formal armed resistance, I don't know.
Well, 70,000 is IDF soldiers are apparently going AWOL in various different countries. That, again, that was a quote from Laith that I'll give. So there is that. There is a huge issue in terms of the mental health and the kind of psychological trauma that's going on for what they've had to do. I guess that's got to come back. There's a displacement now. Of course, people in the north, the Kiryat Shimona and many other northern settlements are under attack. So it's very hard to repopulate them. The same goes for Ashkelon in terms of the south. And there's now this talk in Britain, even Britain is stirring, saying that actually we're going to sanction or any further settlements, that they're actually formally going to go into some action. It does seem as though it's death by 1,000 cuts that is the most likely way that Israel will go down. And those cuts can come in different ways and shapes.
And of course, that's what happened with South Africa.
Sure. So, Ryan, what's your conclusion about the war with Iran? Of course, at the moment, there's that test going on as to whether Iran will buckle and whether it'll get scared in front of the power of the US military, which is considerable and, you know, phenomenal, actually. And yet they've survived so far. Do you see any changes? I mean, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump seem to be doing copy, paste, repeat with everything they're doing. There's nothing new, no new strategy to bring Iran down. So where do you see this going, given that they've failed twice and it looks like the third one's kicking off, but is it going to be the same thing again? Are we going to be back in the same spot after this round of bombings, do you think?
Yeah, the results aren't going to change. It's not like they have some new weapon from a few days ago. And it's not like, oh, we were holding back before, we're really going to get you this time. They already tried to get their target list. Look, Iran is the size of Alaska, which is huge. That's about the size of Western Europe. But unlike Alaska, it has 92 million people. You cannot defeat a country of 92 million people with airstrikes and special forces. You'd have to send in an army. And the American public will not stomach that because there would be 40 or 50,000 casualties. It's just not worth it because there's nothing to gain. It's not in America's national interest to do it. And so they're not going to put up with that. So if you continue this with airstrikes, and it's mostly artillery and, you know, airstrikes, then Iran wins this war. It's sheer numbers and size. 75% of Israel's population are in Tel Aviv and Haifa. If they're going to play this game of tagging each other with ballistic missiles, well, this much larger, much more numerous country wins that exchange, and that's Iran. And, you know, Netanyahu is in a very fragile political situation. He's got corruption charges. There were riots in Jerusalem just a few days ago. There are people who don't want, you know, they're fighting against conscription. People are fleeing the country. Their port in the south has been destroyed. Haifa has been largely damaged from this war. They're not recovering. You can't just live off U.S. aid. And Americans are mad. And then we've got the midterm elections coming up and primaries as quickly as August. So Trump has to find a conclusion in the next 2 months, or he's going to commit political suicide for his party. So the clock is ticking. There's nothing, unless they want to use nuclear weapons, which is insane, they don't have a way out of this. You cannot reopen the Strait of Hormuz by force. What the U.S. could do, same thing they did with Vietnam, is leave. Take your ships and put them back in the Atlantic, lift the sanctions, lift the asset freezer, comply with the demands, and the strait would be reopened. Iran was never a threat to the United States anyway. You know, that's what they ought to do. But we have an egomaniac president in charge, so he's going to continue to do more of the same, and he's going to get the same results, which is not good. Their Gulf state allies have been economically destroyed. These bases are gone, especially in Bahrain and Kuwait. And the UAE and Qatar will be next. And eventually Saudi Arabia. They're going to feel the pain. They don't seem to learn. And they didn't seem to have what are you going to, we're going to attack Karg Island, or we're going to send Marines here. That there's no little super move they can do that's going to change the outcome of this war, unless you're going to actually throw in the entire American army and seriously invade like you did Iraq, which is not happening. Then you cannot win this war through attrition. You can't. Iran wins this in a war of attrition because their ballistic missiles are under mountains and Israel doesn't have the mountains. So Israel air defense consists of very complex machines with, David Sling and Arrow and the Aegis system, Patriot 3 and 2. These cost millions of dollars a piece. It takes a lot of rare earth metals and components. It's 2-year supply line just to make these things. Iran's defense, mountain. It costs $0, zero maintenance. You just underground. It's the best defense. So one side is getting destroyed and the other is not. So if you're going to continue to just throw missiles at each other, the writing's on the wall. You can't win that. So what Israel tried to do was break Lebanon economically by killing civilians and making people flee the country. But now that Iran has said, if you touch Beirut or any populated area, even south of the Litani River, we're hitting you back. And in a ground war against Hezbollah, they've been losing.
So Trump was in some senses sold this war by what happened in Venezuela and what happened in Syria. And the Syrian one is an interesting case. It took them 14 years plus to exact the regime change. But Syria is not Iran, and nor is Venezuela, certainly not Iran. So these are both kind of false comparisons that the hawks might still be pushing to try and get Trump embroiled in a 2.5, 3-year struggle in which they try to bleed Iran and actually bleed themselves. That I can see happening for sure. But then at the end of the day, Iran is used to a resistance economy, is used to being hurt economically, is used to tightening its belt. I can't say the rest of the world would be, because one of the other cards, which you'll know Iran has, is the cables that run underneath the Hormuz, the internet cable systems and other systems that they have that run through the Bab al-Mandeb. It's not just the shipping that could come into play, because the Houthi, the Ansarullah, as you said, have already threatened that they'll shut the Bab al-Mandeb down. But Sam, with all these other asymmetric, possibilities in the war that Iran could engage the US in, does it make any sense at all that they try to go on an attritional, longer escapade? I mean, will it just cost the world even more? It may be that the American military and the Israelis could continue firing bombs at each other and places get destroyed. But actually, these other factors, whether it's the internet, whether it's the kind of the oil supply, the LNG, the gas, the fertilizers, that's going to affect us all, isn't it?
Absolutely. It is going to affect us all, and it is affecting us all already. But I also want to say something else, which is, as I said, I'm a survivor of the Vietnam War. And I remember when the movement won the argument, so to speak. And then getting out of Vietnam became a necessity. And finally, they had to tell the president, you're going to get the hell out, and you're going to do it quickly. And history has speeded up enormously, and I think we're very close to that point already in the United States. Ryan may have a different view, I don't know. But I think they're already in trouble on this war with the American population. And so I don't see that Trump's, I mean, we'll see what happens in November, but I think Trump's maneuverability is going to become very narrow indeed in his hometown. Forget what the rest of the world is going to be telling him, because they're already telling him that, right? But I think the voters at home are going to be telling him where to get off.
Final conclusion from you, Ryan?
I fully agree with that. In fact, you could see more than that, his own military personnel on the Gerald Ford Strike Force carrier, the largest one in the fleet. There was a mutiny. They broke the bathrooms. They broke the laundry. They've been out at sea for a year. They've had enough. And they turned around. The Boxer turned around too, went back to Okinawa because they don't want to do this. And they were talking about reinstituting a draft. That's about as popular as a hole in the head. And nobody wants this. And so there, he's going to get creamed in the midterms. The Democrats are going to take it. And a lot of people, it's not like they really like the Democrats. They're just going to punish the Republican Party. Not only for this Iran war, but also for trying to block the Epstein files. Everyone's still mad about that too.
So the MAGA movement, openly people like Candace Owen and Tucker Carlson, previous advocates of Trump, there's loads of them piling up now who are all openly critical of what he's doing. So if my guests are right, then actually this war of attrition isn't even possible for the Americans, let alone for the Israelis, because the Israelis can't maintain it if the Americans don't fund and finance it. So whatever bluff and bluster Netanyahu gives, in reality, it seems as though the time is running out. And if he continues on the path that he has, it could be what Sam's talking about as well, an internal implosion of the Israeli apparatus itself. So it doesn't need to be destroyed by Iranian missiles. It could be a case of the Israeli society itself saying, look, this is not the way forward. It's not working. We need to do something else about it. Either way, the world would breathe a sigh of relief if we could find a solution to the problem that has become Israel. Many of us knew it was a problem a long time ago. Those who are waking up to it now, of course, are catching up very fast because it's going to be hitting their supermarkets and it's going to be hitting their savings and it's going to be hitting their travel arrangements. Just about everything is going to get affected if Netanyahu and Donald Trump persist with any kind of war on Iran. That much seems to be clear. Thank you for watching this edition of Deep Dive Perspective. Do tune in to Ryan Dawson. He's on Substack and he can be found on X as well. Do check out IJAN and its excellent work in terms of taking on the Israeli embassy and other forces. Let us know where we should plug that.
Other Zionist institutions that claim to be Jewish. We are going after all of them, starting with the Jewish National Fund, which has been supporting the Israeli military, been part of the ethnic cleansing for the last 77 years, et cetera, et cetera. We're going after them. Their head, who's Alan Mendoza, we just helped unelect, and he's now the global affairs correspondent, so to speak, for Reform, for the Reform UK. So he went from the Tories, fascist light, to Reform, fascist heavy, and he is now no longer a councillor, but he is still the head of the Jewish National Fund, and we want to stop them being a charity, and that's part of our campaign now.
That's amazing, and I will linger a little bit here because we didn't get into that, and perhaps we'll have a special program on your work on IJAN and what it's been doing. I'd like to invite you back soon to maybe do that.
We'd love to talk about that.
That would be a special show away from the US. I couldn't focus on that enough, but perhaps next time. And I know also my hat comes off for you because in Barnet, you guys were attacked by Zionists. You were targeted and actually physically assaulted.
That's where we were picketing the Jewish National Fund.
Ah, okay. So that's where...
And we were attacked by people screaming in support of the IDF. In other words, they tore down our Jews Against Genocide sign, and instead they were supporting the IDF, the people doing the genocide.
Yeah, the government won't be highlighting that Jewish people being attacked by Zionists, Jewish citizens in Britain being attacked by Zionists won't hit the headlines so much, and I'm sure that they'll be still nonetheless very, very wary of you. So I'd say good luck with whatever you're doing. And where can we check out IJAN's work?
Well, you can go to the website, which is ijan.org. And you'll find various sectors. As I said, we are a genuinely international organization, and you'll find the different countries under the
And your picket against Israel, what day is that usually?
It's every Friday between 6 and 7. I believe this week we're going to the Charities Commission because they are allowing the JNF, the Jewish National Fund, the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, and UK Lawyers for Israel, they are allowing all three of them to run as charities, which means 25% of whatever funds they raise, they're also getting from taxes that you and I pay.
Well, this is also part of the dismantling that you were talking about. What you're doing here is going for the source of a lot of the revenue that is raised, maybe unwittingly by many Jewish people or the diaspora, where they're almost coerced or blackmailed into funding Israel, funding these kinds of offensive policies. So that's very brave. That's for you to do that in Britain. I mean, I have to commend and I have to sort of take my hat off to that. But
listen, we, like everybody else reasonable, oppose genocide in any form. We've been the subject of genocide and we oppose it. And our slogan is never again for anyone.
Okay, thank you very much. And that date for a conversation about this in more depth is definitely in the diary soon. Thank you for watching Deep Dive Perspective. Thank you to Ryan Dawson as well for contributing. And I guess make your own conclusions. We've got Jews who are fighting Israel tooth and nail. We've got Americans who are fighting the notion of their own nation being sold out to the interests of corporate capitalism, and also, of course, the Jewish networks which claim to be Jewish in Israel. I rather think that they should be described more as fascists and rather than Jewish, personally, but that's for you to decide. Thank you for watching, and thank you for those of you who've already subscribed, those of you who like our channel, who press that button for thanking, etc. We need your support. It's with your support that we can survive. We're not funded or financed by anybody. We're an independent outfit. We're not like state-run media or corporate-funded media. That's why we can bring these kinds of great guests who will just tell it to you straight. Thank you for watching once again. Goodbye.